The winter wind cut through the high towers of Kalen's fortress like a silver blade. Snow swirled around the icy battlements, and the forests below slept under a thick white blanket. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke, the scent of burning pine, and the faint metallic tang of a kingdom built on power and fear. Ilara stood at the edge of the grand hall, her hands clutched tightly around the folds of her dark cloak. She had traveled far, leaving the warmth of her family estate and the comfort of her quiet life. The snowstorm had been relentless, and the wolves in the distance had reminded her that the world outside her home was not the same as the one she had known. She was a bride, yet the man she was to marry was no ordinary king. He was the Lycan king, feared, mysterious, and rumored to carry a curse older than the mountains themselves. The torchlight flickered across the room, casting elongated shadows against the stone walls. Kalen entered silently, his presence filling the hall like the roar of a storm contained. He was taller than any man Ilara had ever seen, broad-shouldered, with eyes that glimmered gold under the flickering firelight. His hair fell in dark waves over his shoulders, and there was a quiet, dangerous grace in the way he moved. He stopped before her, studying her as though trying to see beyond her skin, into her thoughts, her fears, her soul. Ilara felt herself stiffen under his gaze. There was power in him, an unshakable command that made the hall feel small, even with its towering ceilings. "In the next 11 winters," Kalen said, his voice low, smooth, and chillingly intimate, "you will give me 11 sons." His words were a whisper, yet they carried weight that pressed against her chest. Ilara's heart jumped. She did not know whether to be afraid or fascinated. 11 winters, 11 sons. How could one woman bear such a destiny? She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The castle, the forest, even the wind outside seemed to pause, waiting for her reply. "You do not need to answer now," Kalen said, though his eyes never left hers. "But know this. This is not a request. It is a promise, as binding as the blood that flows in my veins." Ilara swallowed hard. She had been raised to obey, to respect authority, but this was unlike anything she had ever known. The weight of centuries of Lycan history pressed down on her, the lives of sons yet unborn, the power that could shape kingdoms resting on her choices. Kalen turned, moving toward the balcony where the moonlight spilled across the floor. He paused, glancing back at her over his shoulder. "Do not fear me for what I am," he said. "Fear me for what you might become if you forget your place, or if you fail to understand me." Ilara followed him, her feet barely making a sound on the cold stone. She tried to read the man behind the eyes, behind the curse, behind the throne, but he remained a mystery. Still, there was something human there, something fractured and lonely. The gold of his eyes flickered like sunlight on ice, and for a moment she imagined that perhaps the monster stories were exaggerated, that beneath the fearsome exterior was a man capable of kindness, even love. But the wind outside reminded her that the world she had stepped into was not safe. The forest below whispered secrets in the language of wolves, the snow hiding dangers both seen and unseen. She had crossed into a land where the night held power, and every choice could shape her fate, and the fate of the king she was to marry. "Tell me," she said, her voice barely more than a breath, "why me?" Kalen's lips curved, almost like a shadow of a smile. "Because you are strong," he said, stepping closer. "Stronger than you know. You will need that strength here. The winters are harsh, the enemies many, and my people, even I, demand much from those who join my life." Ilara felt her chest tighten. She was not unafraid, but she also felt a spark, a tiny flame of curiosity and courage that had been dormant all her life. Perhaps this was the place where she could test her own limits, where she could discover who she truly was beneath the layers of etiquette, expectation, and fear. The night deepened. Kalen moved to the hearth, and the fire reflected in his golden eyes. He reached for a goblet of dark wine, but his gaze remained on her. "You will not be alone," he said. "But you will not be free either. That is the nature of this life. Love, duty, and power are bound together here, and often they demand sacrifice." Ilara's thoughts raced. The promise of 11 sons was not simply about family. It was about the survival of a bloodline, a kingdom, and perhaps a species. The weight of prophecy pressed on her shoulders, and yet there was something magnetic in the way Kalen spoke. She felt drawn to him, as though the cold wind and the centuries of snow had funneled her destiny right to this moment, to this man. Hours passed in silence. They moved through the fortress as if it were a living being, the walls echoing their steps, the shadows dancing like spirits. Kalen showed her the council chamber, the armory where weapons glinted in the moonlight, and the library filled with tomes older than any kingdom she had ever known. Each room told a story. Each corridor whispered secrets. And Ilara began to understand that she was not merely a bride. She was a participant in a history that had been centuries in the making, one that might be rewritten by her courage or her failure. Finally, they reached a small balcony overlooking the snow-covered forest. The wind tugged at her cloak, and the moonlight turned the landscape into a sea of silver and shadow. Kalen stepped closer, his presence enveloping her like a tide. "You must understand," he said, his voice low and resonant. "The winters are unforgiving. The curse that binds my blood is patient and cruel. If you falter, if you do not grasp the life you have chosen, it will take more than my wrath to punish you. The forest, the wolves, the bloodline itself. All will conspire to remind you of what is at stake." Ilara felt her breath catch. She had entered the fortress as a visitor, a bride in name alone. But now she understood the gravity of her position. She was a queen in waiting, a mother of sons not yet born, and perhaps a savior or destroyer of a cursed line. Kalen studied her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something unguarded: pain, longing, loneliness. The man behind the king, the wolf behind the throne. She wanted to reach for him, to touch the broken edges of his soul, yet fear rooted her in place. "Do you understand?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "Do you see what this life will demand?" Ilara nodded, though the words failed her. She understood in that frozen moment that she was stepping into a world of shadows and moonlight, where every heartbeat could be a choice between survival and destruction, love and duty, life and death. The first snowflakes of the night drifted past the balcony, delicate and silent, and Kalen whispered, almost to himself, "The first winter is coming, and it will not wait for anyone." Ilara's gaze followed the snow into the darkness. She realized that she could not turn back now. Her life had been bound to Kalen's, and the future, uncertain, dangerous, and yet strangely beautiful, lay stretched before her like the endless silver forest. From somewhere deep within the fortress, a shadow moved. She caught a glimpse of a figure slipping through the corridors, watching, listening. The thought made her pulse quicken. This was a world where enemies and allies were not easily distinguished, and the first lesson of her new life was clear. Trust was a currency more precious than gold, and every choice had consequences far beyond her understanding. Kalen turned to her once more, the gold in his eyes shining brighter against the moonlight. "Do not falter, Ilara," he said. "The winters will test you, and I will test you. But if you endure, if you rise above fear and doubt, you will see the power you hold. And perhaps in time, you will even see me, not as a king, but as a man." Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of the moment. The fortress felt alive around them, the wind, the snow, the shadows, all holding their breath. She had stepped into a world of legends, curses, and destiny. And though fear gripped her heart, a strange sense of resolve bloomed within her. She would face the winters. She would face Kaelin, and somehow she would survive. But as she turned to leave the balcony, she glimpsed the shadow once more, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching from the edge of the hall. Ilara's pulse raced. The first test of her new life had already begun. The wind howled, the snow fell heavier, and the Lycan king's words echoed in her mind. "In the next 11 winters you will give me 11 sons." Somewhere in the shadows, destiny waited. The snow lay thick over the kingdom, muffling sound and shaping the world into a realm of silver silence. Inside Kaelin's fortress, Ilara wandered through the corridors, guided only by torchlight and the soft echo of her own footsteps. The walls seemed to watch her, carved with the history of centuries, the faces of kings and queens long gone staring down with silent judgment. She could feel Kaelin everywhere. His presence lingered in the hallways, in the grand dining chamber, even in the shadowed corners of the library. It was as though the fortress itself had absorbed him, carrying his power through stone and air. Ilara felt both awe and trepidation. She had come here as a bride, yet she had no idea what it meant to live in the heart of a kingdom ruled by a Lycan king, bound by curse and legacy. Kaelin appeared silently behind her, his footsteps light as a wolf's, and Ilara started at his sudden presence. He studied her with that golden gaze that seemed to pierce through layers of clothing, walls, and even her own thoughts. "You move cautiously," he observed, voice low and smooth. "The halls are safe enough for those who know them. But you are still learning the ways of this fortress, and of me." Ilara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I am trying," she said softly, though her words felt weak under the weight of his scrutiny. Kaelin stepped closer, a subtle tension in the air, a mixture of authority and something more personal that made her pulse quicken. "Trying is not enough," he said. "Here, you must endure, understand, and adapt. The winters test more than the body. They test the mind, the heart, and the soul." He led her to the armory, a cavernous hall filled with weapons glinting in the firelight. Spears, swords, and shields lined the walls, each etched with symbols of battles fought and victories won. Kaelin picked up a long sword, the steel humming faintly as he held it. "You will train," he said. "Not just to defend yourself, but to understand the power that runs through my bloodline. A Lycan does not simply rule with strength. We rule with instinct, strategy, and the ability to endure what mortals cannot imagine." Ilara felt a shiver run through her, equal parts fear and fascination. The sword was heavy, its weight demanding more than mere strength. Yet when Kaelin guided her hands, showing her the proper stance and motion, she realized her own strength, her own will, had untapped power waiting beneath her timid exterior. "You are capable," Kaelin said, watching her closely. "But capable is not enough. You must be willing to face the darkness, not just around you, but inside you. Only then can you survive the winters. And me." Ilara's breath caught. The last words carried a meaning she could not yet fully understand, yet they drew her in, pulled her closer, despite her fear. There was a tension in the room, sharp and silent, that felt like the edge of a blade pressed against her heart. Days passed in a blur of lessons, shadowed corridors, and whispered conversations. Kaelin showed her the intricacies of his kingdom, the wolves that served as scouts, the council that guided decisions, and the rituals that tied him to his people. He shared stories of his lineage, of kings and queens who had failed, and of a curse older than memory that bound his blood. Ilara listened, absorbing every detail, every warning. And yet, in the quiet moments, she began to see the man behind the king. The centuries of isolation had left him wary, often harsh, but also capable of small acts of unexpected gentleness, a hand on her shoulder when she stumbled, a quiet word of encouragement, a fleeting smile when she succeeded in her training. One night, the castle was silent, except for the howling wind and the occasional creak of ancient stone. Ilara found herself in the library, drawn to the scent of old parchment and the quiet wisdom of the books. She opened a heavy tome, its pages brittle with age, and read of Lycan customs, rituals, and the burdens of kingship. A shadow fell across the page, and she looked up to see Kaelin standing behind her, arms crossed, golden eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "You read too much," he said, though his tone held no real accusation. "Knowledge is power, but understanding is survival. You must feel the rhythm of this world, not just study it." Ilara closed the book, heart beating faster. "I want to understand," she said softly. Kaelin stepped closer, and the air between them seemed to hum. "Understanding comes at a price," he said. "Are you prepared to pay it?" She nodded, though she did not fully comprehend what the price would be. The weight of prophecy, the winters ahead, the sons she was meant to bear, all of it pressed down on her. Yet beneath the fear, there was determination. She would endure. She would survive. She would prove herself worthy, even if it meant confronting the darkness of the Lycan curse itself. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Ilara trained relentlessly, learning the movements of the sword, the stealth of the wolf, and the intricate politics of the kingdom. Kaelin watched her progress, sometimes offering corrections, sometimes allowing her to fail so she could learn her own limits. With each lesson, the tension between them grew, not just the pull of attraction, but the weight of power, trust, and unspoken emotions. One evening, during a rare calm in the snowstorm, Kaelin led her to the edge of the forest that surrounded the fortress. The trees were black silhouettes against the silver snow, and the wind carried the faint howl of wolves in the distance. "Tonight," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you will face the first test of your understanding." Ilara's heart pounded. "What must I do?" Kaelin gestured to the forest. "You will enter it alone. Trust your instincts. Do not fear the shadows, the cold, or the wolves. They are not your enemies unless you make them so. Move with purpose, or you will not return." She swallowed hard, stepping toward the edge of the forest. The snow crunched beneath her boots, each step echoing in the silent night. Kaelin's gaze followed her, unwavering, until she disappeared among the trees. The forest seemed alive, the snow shifting under invisible paws. Shadows moved in the periphery, and Ilara felt the thrill of fear and freedom in equal measure. She remembered Kaelin's lessons: breathe, listen, watch, and feel. The wind carried voices, scents, and signals she had never noticed before. But she focused, determined not to fail. Hours passed, and the moon climbed higher. Ilara encountered a small pack of wolves, their eyes reflecting gold in the moonlight. She froze, recalling Kaelin's words: "They are not your enemies unless you make them so." Slowly, she knelt, her hands calm, her voice soft. "I mean no harm," she whispered. The wolves circled her, sniffed, and then melted into the shadows, leaving her breathless and astonished. By the time she returned to the fortress, snow clinging to her cloak, Kaelin was waiting. His eyes held something unreadable: pride, curiosity, perhaps relief. "You survived," he said simply, though the edge in his voice hinted at more. "And you learned. That is the first step. Do not underestimate the forest or the winters. They are patient teachers and unforgiving masters." Elara met his gaze, feeling the pull between them stronger than ever. "I understand," she said, though her voice trembled. Kaelin studied her, and for a moment the king and the wolf seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. "Understanding is not enough," he said softly. "But it is a beginning. If you continue like this, perhaps you will endure the winters, and perhaps you will even survive me." Elara's pulse quickened. The words were a warning, a challenge, and a promise all at once. She felt the weight of her destiny pressing down, yet beneath it, the faint spark of trust and connection between her and the Lycan king. As she turned to go, a movement in the shadows caught her eye, a figure watching from the edge of the hall. She froze. Kaelin followed her gaze, and his eyes narrowed. "Trouble," he murmured. "You are being watched. This world is not as empty as it seems, Elara, and those who watch often carry ill intent." Elara felt a chill deeper than the winter wind. She had survived her first test, faced the forest and the wolves, yet the fortress held its own dangers. Whispers of politics, envy, and ambition lingered in the air, and she realized that her journey had only just begun. Kaelin stepped closer, his presence a shield, a warning, and a promise. "You will need courage," he said, voice low. "You will need strength, and more than anything you will need your heart, because the winters will demand it." Elara nodded, her resolve hardening like ice in the snow. She had crossed into a world of power, danger, and destiny. The Lycan king's kingdom was not a place for the faint-hearted, but she would not falter. Not now, not ever. Yet in the shadows, the Watcher moved closer, unseen but ever present. The first true challenge of the fortress was approaching, and neither Elara nor Kaelin could predict what it would bring. The wind howled, the snow fell heavier, and the golden eyes of the Lycan king followed her as she returned to her chambers. The first winter of lessons, trials, and tension had passed, but the real test was just beginning. The first light of winter came late, creeping across the snow-covered land in pale, fragile beams. The forest outside Kaelin's fortress glittered like a frozen sea, each branch heavy with frost, each shadow deeper than the one before. Inside, the castle hummed with tension. Elara had returned from her first test in the forest, but the feeling of being watched lingered, threading through her every movement like cold silk. Kaelin appeared in the hall as always, moving silently, his golden eyes flicking over her with careful calculation. The shadow from the previous night still haunted the corners of her mind. And she noticed for the first time that even the Lycan king, with all his power and experience, did not entirely relax when danger was near. "You learned," he said simply, stepping closer. "And yet, the forest was only the beginning." Elara felt her pulse quicken. "What comes next?" Kaelin's expression darkened, not with anger, but with the weight of centuries. "The curse grows stronger with every winter. The blood that flows through my veins is not merely my own. It carries the echoes of every Lycan before me, the failures, the betrayals, and the losses. If we are careless, it will consume more than my kingdom. It will consume you." Elara's stomach twisted. She had imagined danger, trials, and harsh lessons, but this unseen, living darkness, was more terrifying than any forest wolf or storm-swept balcony. Kaelin took her hands, steadying her, and for a moment she saw not the king, not the predator, but a man bound by loneliness, regret, and duty. "I cannot shield you from everything," he said, "but I can teach you to survive it, and perhaps to temper it." Elara nodded, though her heart trembled. She was beginning to understand that the Lycan king's world was not only about strength and skill, it was about endurance, strategy, and the courage to face a fate that had been written long before she was born. The next weeks passed in a blur of training and study. Alara learned to move through the castle like a shadow, to listen to the whispers of the wind, and to feel the rhythm of the forest. Kalen was a demanding teacher, but his lessons were precise, and beneath the harsh corrections was a subtle guidance that made her stronger, sharper, and more aware. One evening, Kalen led her to the ritual chamber, a vast room beneath the fortress carved from living stone. The walls glimmered faintly with veins of crystal, and the air smelled faintly of earth and incense. "This chamber," he said, "holds the key to understanding the curse. It is where our people confront the darkness in our blood, where we face what the prophecy demands." Alara stepped inside, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. The crystals shimmered with a strange light, reflecting the golden hue of Kalen's eyes. She sensed the power in the room, ancient and patient, waiting to test those who entered. Kalen moved to the center, placing his hand upon a carved circle etched into the stone floor. "This ritual is not one of magic for show," he said. "It is a communion with the bloodline, a dialogue with the curse itself. You will not perform it, but you must witness it and learn the truth of what binds me." As Kalen began the ritual, the air thickened, and Alara felt the presence of countless ancestors watching, judging, and testing her. The room seemed to pulse with life, shadows moving like whispers along the walls. She shivered, but she did not turn away. She would not falter, not now. When the ritual ended, Kalen's expression was unreadable. "The curse is patient," he said quietly, "and it knows fear. You have learned that already, but there is more to survive than fear. There is will and courage and the ability to trust what cannot be seen." Ilara's mind spun with the weight of his words. Trust what cannot be seen. She realized that survival in this kingdom was not merely about skill or strength. It was about understanding, connection, and the courage to face unknown dangers. The next day, she was awakened by a commotion in the courtyard. Wolves, dozens of them, moved in precise formation, circling the gates. Guards shouted, and the wind carried the distant sound of hooves. Kalen was already on the balcony, eyes narrowed, golden gaze scanning the horizon. "They come," he said simply. "Enemies of the crown, rivals who seek to claim what is mine." Alara felt fear, but also determination. She had trained, learned, and faced the forest. She would not falter now. The gates of the fortress opened, and the first riders appeared cloaked in black, their banners bearing symbols she did not recognize. Kalen moved like a shadow, silent and precise, directing his guards and preparing for battle. Yet even as the fortress prepared to defend itself, he glanced at her. "Stay close," he said. "Observe, learn, endure." Alara nodded, heart pounding, and followed him to the edge of the hall where she could see the battlefield unfold. Arrows flew, the wolves leapt, and the clash of steel echoed through the mountains. Kalen was everywhere at once, a storm contained in a man, commanding with instinct and precision. And yet amid the chaos there were moments of connection. When he caught her gaze, there was an unspoken acknowledgement, a silent promise that she would not be abandoned, that her courage mattered, and that her presence was part of the strength of the fortress. By nightfall, the attackers had been repelled, their banners retreating into the snow-covered forests. Kalen surveyed the battlefield, golden eyes sharp and unreadable. He turned to Alara, who had witnessed the fury and strategy of a king in battle. "You learned well," he said. "Not in the forest, not in the training chambers, but here, amid fire and steel, you saw the truth of survival. The winters demand more than skill. They demand heart." Ilara's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and fear. She was beginning to understand the depth of the Lycan king's world, the complexity of power, the weight of bloodlines, and the demands of a destiny she could not yet fully grasp. But the shadows of the castle still whispered. That same unseen figure, the one who had watched her from the halls, had not been seen during the battle. But its presence lingered in her mind like a distant drumbeat. Danger was never far, and trust was a fragile thread in a kingdom of wolves, men, and prophecy. Days turned into weeks. The cold deepened, and the forest seemed to grow darker, older, more secretive. Kalen guided Ilara through each lesson with patience tempered by intensity. He taught her to read the signs of the forest, to anticipate danger, and to understand the unspoken rules of power and survival. Ilara, in turn, began to see the man behind the king and the wolf. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when his golden eyes softened, when the harshness of his command gave way to warmth, and when the centuries of loneliness that weighed on him seemed almost visible. She realized that the Lycan king was not merely a predator, but a guardian, a father to his people, and a man bound by duty and by a curse he had inherited and could not escape alone. One night, under a full silver moon, Kalen took her to the balcony overlooking the forest. The wind was sharper than ever, carrying the scent of pine, snow, and distant danger. "You are ready," he said, voice low. "Not for battle alone, not for prophecy alone, but for the truth. The curse will test you soon, more directly, more cruelly. You must be prepared." Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of the moment. "I will try," she said, though she knew the word was inadequate. Kalen studied her, his gaze lingering in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Trying is not enough," he said softly. "Endurance, courage, and understanding are required, and trust. Trust is the most dangerous and the most precious gift in this world." Ilara felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, the centuries of Lycan history, the prophecy, and the curse all seemed to press down on her heart. She realized that she was no longer a passive observer in this kingdom. She was part of it, bound to it, and bound to Kalen. As the moon climbed higher, a howl echoed from the forest, long and mournful. Ilara felt it vibrate through the snow, through the walls of the fortress, and through her very soul. Kalen's eyes darkened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and grounding. "They are calling," he said. "The pack, the curse, the winters, all of it. You must listen, Ilara, and learn. The true test is coming, and it will ask more of you than you can yet imagine." Ilara nodded, her resolve hardening. The forest, the wolves, the curse, and the Lycan king's golden eyes, all of it pressed upon her, a world of danger, power, and destiny. She had survived the forest, witnessed battle, and learned the ways of the fortress. Now she understood that the real challenge, the test of heart, courage, and trust, was only beginning. And somewhere deep in the shadows of the castle, the watcher moved again, silent, patient, waiting for the moment when the young bride would face not only the curse of the Lycan king, but the schemes of those who lurked in darkness. The first true winter of lessons was over. The trials of blood, trust, and power were far from complete. And the golden eyes of the Lycan king followed her, a promise and a warning entwined in the cold silver light. The first snow of the new winter fell softly over the Lycan kingdom, blanketing the fortress and forests in silver silence. The wind carried a faint promise of change, brushing through the trees and rustling the ancient banners that hung along the battlements. Within the castle, the air was thick with anticipation, a tension that seemed to hum in the stone walls. Ilara stood in the grand hall, her cloak heavy with snow from her walk across the courtyard. The lessons, trials, and battles of the past months weighed upon her, but she felt a strength she had never known before. She was no longer the timid bride who had arrived at Kalen's fortress. She had grown, learned, and endured. And yet she sensed that the true test, the one that would shape her destiny and the Lycan bloodline, was about to begin. Kalen appeared silently, his golden eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. There was a gravity in his presence, a quiet command that made the hall feel smaller, more intimate. He moved to stand beside her, and for a moment, neither spoke. The weight of the winter, the curse, and the prophecy pressed down on them both. "Tonight," Kalen said finally, his voice low and measured, "the curse will reveal its true nature. You have learned much, Ilara, but understanding will not be enough. You must act, endure, and trust." Ilara's heart tightened. She had trained, faced the forest, observed battle, and survived the trials of the fortress. But the thought of confronting the curse itself filled her with both dread and determination. She nodded, letting her resolve steady her. "I am ready," she said, though a tremor ran through her voice. Kalen led her to the ritual chamber. The same vast room carved from living stone, where the crystals in the walls shimmered faintly, as if alive. The air smelled of earth and incense, heavy and ancient, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. "You will not be alone," Kalen said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "But you must face this as yourself, not merely as my bride or a student. The curse tests hearts, not strength alone." Ilara drew a deep breath, feeling the chill of the room settle into her bones. The circle etched into the floor seemed to pulse with a light of its own, casting shifting patterns on the walls. She stepped inside, feeling the energy thrumming beneath her feet. Kalen began the ritual, his voice low and melodic, speaking words older than the fortress itself. The crystals glowed brighter, and shadows deepened, coiling around them like living spirits. Ilara felt the presence of countless ancestors, their whispers brushing against her mind. The air grew heavy, and she sensed the curse, patient and cruel, reaching for her, testing her resolve. Fear rose in her chest, but she did not move back. She focused on Kalen, on the lessons he had taught her, on the courage she had discovered within herself. She felt the bond between them, not just as bride and king, but as partners facing a force that had shaped centuries. The shadows shifted, forming shapes, visions of failure, isolation, and loss. The curse showed her what might happen if she faltered. The kingdom consumed, the bloodline broken, Kalen lost to the darkness he had carried alone for centuries. Her heart ached at the thought, but she steadied herself. "You are stronger than you know," Kalen whispered, his hand brushing hers. The touch was grounding, a lifeline in the storm of shadows. "Trust yourself. Trust what you have learned. Trust me." Ilara closed her eyes, centering herself, letting the fear pass like wind through the trees. She opened her eyes and stepped fully into the circle, letting the energy of the room flow through her, merging with the lessons, courage, and instinct she had built. The shadows recoiled, the air shifted, and for the first time she felt the curse hesitate, uncertain. Kalen's voice rose, commanding yet gentle, and together they guided the energy of the room. Light and shadow clashed and intertwined, a dance of centuries-old power, until finally the room stilled. The crystals dimmed to a soft glow, and the oppressive weight of the curse lifted, leaving a calm that felt almost holy. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. She had faced the darkness and endured, her courage and heart shaping the outcome. Kalen knelt beside her, his golden eyes warm, not just with pride, but with something deeper, a rare openness he rarely showed. "You have done what few could," he said softly. "The curse is weakened, its grip loosened, but more importantly, you have shown what I have long forgotten, that the heart, courage, and trust can shape destiny." Ilara looked up at him, feeling a mixture of awe, respect, and a warmth that had grown quietly between them over the months. "I could not have done it alone," she said, her voice steady. Kaelin's hand found hers, holding it firmly. "No one survives here alone. And yet, you have surpassed even my expectations." His gaze held hers, golden eyes reflecting moonlight and firelight alike. "Perhaps you are not merely my bride, Ilara. Perhaps you are my equal." Her breath caught. The words carried both weight and promise, and for the first time, she felt the full measure of their bond, not just bound by prophecy or duty, but by respect, trust, and connection, forged through fire and shadow. The castle felt alive around them, every corridor, shadow, and whisper bearing witness to what had just occurred. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the land in silver, and the wind carried a sense of renewal. The kingdom had endured, the curse had been challenged, and the bond between the Lycan king and his bride had transformed into something stronger, something enduring. As they stood on the balcony, looking out over the silent forest, Kaelin spoke again, his voice quiet but steady. "The winters ahead will still test us. The prophecy of suns remains. But tonight we have rewritten a part of our destiny, and I see now there is hope that did not exist before." Ilara felt the snow on her cheeks, the cold in the air, and the warmth of Kaelin's hand holding hers. She had endured the curse, faced the shadows, and emerged stronger. And she understood finally that love in this world was not merely desire, it was courage, trust, and the willingness to face darkness together. Suddenly, a distant howl cut through the winter night, sharp and mournful. Ilara felt it resonate in her chest, a reminder that the forest, the pack, and the unseen threats still lingered. She looked at Kaelin, whose eyes darkened, alert and commanding. "They remain," he said, voice low. "Even as we triumph, there are those who would challenge us, who would test our bond and our kingdom." Ilara nodded, a spark of determination lighting her gaze. "Then we face them," she said, voice steady. "Together." Kaelin's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Together," he echoed, and for the first time the centuries of isolation and darkness in his eyes seemed to soften, replaced by something enduring, human, and alive. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light over the fortress and the forest beyond. The wind carried whispers of destiny, courage, and the promise of new life. 11 winters, 11 suns, and countless challenges lay ahead. But the first step had been taken. The curse had been faced, the bond had been forged, and the kingdom, fragile yet enduring, could look toward a future shaped by heart, trust, and courage. As the night deepened, Ilara rested her head on Kaelin's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, the strength of his hand, and the knowledge that they had survived the first true trial together. The snow fell endlessly, soft and pure, covering the land in silver, and for the first time, Ilara felt the weight of destiny balanced by hope. From the shadows, the Watcher, the figure who had lingered in silence, unseen but always present, moved back into darkness. Whatever schemes or dangers had threatened them, whatever plots had lingered in the corners of the castle, were now held at bay. For now. Kaelin's golden eyes turned to hers, steady and unyielding. "The first winter ends," he whispered. "But the rest will shape us, test us, and demand everything we have. Are you ready for that, Ilara?" She met his gaze, feeling every lesson, every trial, and every heartbeat that had led to this moment. "I am ready," she said firmly, "for the winters, for the kingdom, and for you." Kaelin nodded, a rare softness in his expression. "Then let the next winter come," he said, "and let it find us prepared, together." The castle settled into quiet again, the snow falling heavier, the wind singing through the towers. Outside, the forest whispered of destiny, courage, and life yet to come. And in the heart of the Lycan king's fortress, a young bride and her king faced the future, their bond unbroken, their hearts entwined, and their courage unwavering. The prophecy had begun, but so had their story. And the first winter had proven that together they could endure anything.